The crack of gunfire echoed through the Montana wilderness as Katherine Bennett tore through the underbrush, her heart pounding like a steam engine and lungs burning with each desperate breath. The year was 1876, and she was running for her life across the untamed frontier, her once fine blue dress now torn and mudded from 3 days of flight through the rugged territory outside Concord. "Find that woman," a harsh voice bellowed in the distance. "Lawson wants her dead before sundown." Katherine stumbled on a tree root, catching herself against a pine trunk as she frantically scanned the darkening forest. The Blackwater Gang, the most feared outlaws in the territory, had already murdered her father for the deed to their land, and she was the only witness to their crime. Night was falling fast, and with it would come the bitter Montana cold. Without shelter, she wouldn't survive until morning. Through the trees, she spotted a thin wisp of smoke rising against the dusky sky. A cabin. Salvation or danger, she had no choice but to risk it. As the temperature dropped and shadows lengthened, Katherine forced her exhausted body forward, praying whoever dwelled there would show mercy to a desperate woman. The small log cabin came into view, sturdy, well-maintained, with a corral holding 3 horses nearby. A lantern glowed in the window, promising warmth within. She had barely reached the porch when the door swung open. A tall man stood silhouetted in the doorway, rifle raised and aimed directly at her chest. His features were obscured in shadow, but his stance was unmistakably vigilant. "State your business," he commanded, his voice deep and cautious, "and do it quick." Katherine raised trembling hands. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst. "They're going to kill me." Before he could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats carried through the trees. The man's head turned sharply toward the noise, then back to Katherine. In one fluid motion, he lowered his rifle and reached out, pulling her inside the cabin. "Who's after you?" he asked, closing the door and moving swiftly to extinguish the lantern. "The Blackwater Gang," Katherine managed, sinking against the wall as her legs threatened to give out. "They murdered my father." The man's expression hardened. "How many?" "5, maybe 6. Their leader is a man called Lawson." A flicker of recognition crossed his face as he moved to the window, peering through a narrow gap in the curtains. "I know of them. Nasty bunch." Katherine studied him in the fading light. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with an angular jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. His eyes were alert, intelligent, and currently fixed on the approaching danger. "Name's Henry Ashford," he said without looking at her. "And you've brought trouble to my doorstep, miss." "Bennett, Katherine Bennett," she swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go." Henry nodded toward a trapdoor nearly hidden beneath a bearskin rug. "Get in there now, don't make a sound." Katherine hesitated only briefly before lifting the door and lowering herself into the small root cellar below. Henry replaced the rug just as the sound of horses grew louder outside. From her hiding place, Katherine could hear muffled voices. Her hands trembled as dust from the floorboards above filtered down with each heavy footstep. "Evening, gentlemen," she heard Henry say, his tone suddenly relaxed, almost friendly. "What brings you out this way after dark?" a gruff voice responded. "Looking for a woman. Young, dark-haired, blue dress. Seen anyone matching that description?" "Can't say that I have," Henry replied. "Been hunting all day, just got back an hour ago. Mind if we look around?" There was a moment of tense silence before Henry spoke again. "Actually, I do mind. I've got no woman here, and I don't take kindly to armed men inviting themselves into my home. You calling me a liar?" The outlaw's voice grew threatening. "I'm saying you've got no business here," Henry stated firmly. "This is my property, and you're trespassing." Katherine held her breath, certain a gunfight would erupt above her head. "Look, friend," another voice interjected, sounding slightly more reasonable. "We're not looking for trouble. The woman we're after stole something valuable. Just let us take a quick look around and we'll be on our way." "I work for the Carter Ranch," Henry said, his voice carrying a subtle warning. "Mr. Carter doesn't appreciate strangers harassing his men. Now, I suggest you continue your search elsewhere before this gets unpleasant." The mention of the Carter Ranch seemed to give the outlaws pause. There was muttering among them before the first man spoke again. "Fine. But if you see her, there's money in it for you. She's wanted for theft and murder." "I'll keep that in mind," Henry replied evenly. Katherine listened as the men's boots clomped across the porch and back to their horses. Long minutes passed before the trapdoor opened and Henry's face appeared above her. "They're gone for now," he said, extending a hand to help her up. "But they'll be back. The Blackwater Gang doesn't give up easy." Katherine emerged from the cellar, her legs unsteady. "Thank you. They're lying about me. I haven't stolen anything or killed anyone." Henry moved to relight the lantern. "I figured as much. Those men have a reputation." In the soft glow of the lamp, she could see him clearly for the first time, broad-shouldered and lean, with hair the color of wheat and eyes as gray as storm clouds. A thin scar ran along his jawline and his hands bore the calluses of hard work. "Why did you help me?" Katherine asked. Henry shrugged as he stoked the fire in the small stone hearth. "I know trouble when I see it, and you weren't the one bringing it." He gestured toward a wooden chair. "Sit. You look ready to collapse." Katherine sank gratefully into the chair as Henry filled a tin cup with water from a bucket and handed it to her. She drank deeply, suddenly aware of her desperate thirst. "Now," he said, settling onto a bench across from her, "tell me what's really going on." Katherine's fingers tightened around the cup. "My father and I had a small ranch north of Concord. 2 days ago, Lawson and his men came, claiming they had papers showing they owned our land. When my father disputed it, She faltered, the memory still too fresh. "They shot him. Right in front of me." Henry's expression remained stoic, but his eyes darkened. "And they're after you because you witnessed it." Katherine nodded. "That and because my father's will leaves everything to me. The land has been in our family for years. I know their documents are forged." "The law in Concord. Sheriff Davis is Lawson's cousin," Katherine interrupted bitterly. "I tried going to him. He told me to sign over the deed or face charges myself." Henry leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You're in a tight spot, Miss Bennett. Those men won't stop until they find you." "I know," she whispered, fighting back tears of exhaustion and fear. "I just needed somewhere to rest. I'll be gone by morning." "And go where?" Henry asked. "In that torn dress with no supplies, no horse." Katherine had no answer. She'd been running on instinct and terror, with no real plan beyond escaping immediate danger. Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You can stay here tonight. We'll figure something out tomorrow." "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" Katherine asked. A shadow passed over Henry's face. "Let's just say I have my reasons for disliking men who take what isn't theirs." He stood and moved to a chest in the corner, pulling out a worn but clean shirt and a pair of trousers. "These will be too big, but they're better than what you've got on. There's a screen in the corner where you can change. I'll fix us something to eat." Katherine accepted the clothes gratefully. Behind the privacy screen, she peeled off her ruined dress, wincing at the scratches and bruises that covered her arms and legs. Henry's shirt hung to her knees, and she had to roll the trousers several times at the waist and ankles, but the clean fabric felt like luxury against her skin. When she emerged, Henry was placing 2 bowls of stew on the table. The savory aroma made her stomach clench with hunger. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's hot." They ate in silence, Katherine too famished to speak until she'd finished every morsel. As she set down her spoon, she noticed Henry watching her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." He nodded, then cleared their bowls. "You take the bed tonight. I'll sleep by the fire." Katherine started to protest, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. The small bed in the corner, with its quilt and feather pillow, looked like paradise after days of running and sleeping on the ground. She barely managed to thank him again before collapsing onto the mattress, sleep claiming her instantly in her dreams. She was running again, pursued by faceless men with guns, her father's blood staining her hands. She awoke with a gasp, momentarily disoriented in the unfamiliar darkness. "Easy," came Henry's voice from nearby. "You're safe." Katherine's eyes adjusted to see him sitting in a chair near the bed, rifle across his knees. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the cabin. "Have you been awake all night?" she asked. "Someone had to keep watch," he replied simply. "Dawn's not far off. Try to get a little more sleep." Instead, Katherine sat up, drawing the quilt around her shoulders. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Ashford. You said you work for the Carter Ranch." Henry nodded. "Going on 5 years now." "I manage their northern grazing lands. This cabin belongs to them, technically, but it's mine to use." "You're a long way from the main ranch," Katherine observed. "That's how I prefer it," he said with a hint of a smile. "Never been one for crowds. And before the Carter Ranch." His face closed slightly. "Here and there. Drove cattle up from Texas, fought in the war for a spell. Nothing worth mentioning." Katherine sensed there was more to his story, but she didn't press. Everyone on the frontier had pasts they preferred to leave behind, herself included now. As the first pale light of dawn crept through the cabin windows, Henry stood and stretched. "I need to check the horses and see if our visitors left any surprises. Stay inside." While he was gone, Katherine took stock of the cabin. It was small but neat, containing only the essentials: the bed, table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, and shelves holding provisions and a few books, more than she might have expected from a solitary cowboy. A rifle rack hung on one wall, alongside a gun belt with a holstered Colt revolver. Henry returned shortly, his expression grim. "They've been back," he said. "Found tracks circling the cabin and heading toward the creek. They're searching the area." Katherine's heart sank. "I've put you in danger by coming here." "I was in danger the moment I decided to live in Montana territory," he replied dryly. He moved to the stove and began preparing coffee. "The question is, what do we do about you?" "I can't go back to Concord," Katherine said. "No, you can't," Henry agreed. "Not until we can prove what Lawson did." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and handed one to Katherine. "How well do you ride?" The question caught her off guard. "Well enough. My father raised horses before we came west." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "Good, because I think our best option is to get you to Helena. The territorial marshal has an office there. He's a fair man from what I've heard. If anyone can help you, it's him." "Helena's 3 days' ride from here," Katherine said. "4 the way we'll have to go," Henry corrected. "We can't take the main trails. Lawson will have men watching them." Katherine set down her cup. "I can't ask you to take me all that way. You've already risked enough." Henry's gray eyes met hers steadily. "Miss Bennett, those men will kill you if they find you. I'm not about to send you off alone through territory you don't know, hunted by killers who do know it." "But your job—" "I've got time coming. Carter owes me." He sipped his coffee. "Besides, I know these mountains better than Lawson's men. I can get you to Helena safely." Katherine studied him, trying to understand this man who was offering to risk his life for a woman he'd just met. "Why are you doing this?" Henry was quiet for a long moment before answering. 6 years ago, I had a younger sister, Elizabeth. She and her husband had a small place outside Fort Worth. Some men wanted their water rights. His eyes grew distant. No one stood up for them. By the time I got word and rode down from Kansas, they were both dead. Catherine's throat tightened. I'm sorry. So am I. Henry set his cup down with finality. I'm not letting that happen again, not when I can do something about it. Their eyes locked across the table, and in that moment, Katherine saw beneath the stoic exterior to the man within a man with principles, with pain, with purpose. Something shifted between them, an unspoken understanding forming in the quiet cabin. All right, she said finally. When do we leave? As soon as it's full light. We'll need to move fast. Henry stood. I'll get supplies together. There's a spare coat by the door that should fit you well enough. As Henry busied himself preparing for their journey, Katherine found herself watching him, the efficient way he moved, the quiet competence in his hands as he checked ammunition and packed provisions. For the first time since her father's murder, she felt a flicker of hope. An hour later, they were ready to depart. Henry had saddled 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a steady-looking bay mare for Katherine. Saddlebags bulged with supplies, and both of them were armed, Henry with his rifle and revolver, Katherine with a smaller pistol he had insisted she take. Can you use this? He had asked, demonstrating how to load and fire it. My father taught me, she'd replied, handling the weapon with quiet confidence. Now, as they prepared to mount up, Henry paused, scanning the tree line with narrowed eyes. What is it? Katherine asked, suddenly alert. Nothing, he said after a moment. Just being cautious. We'll head northeast first, then cut back west toward the mountains. Make our trail harder to follow. Katherine nodded, gathering the reins. As she swung into the saddle, the reality of what they were undertaking settled over her. 4 days through wilderness with a man she barely knew, pursued by killers who wouldn't hesitate to gun them both down. Henry must have read her expression. One day at a time, Miss Bennett, he said quietly. That's how we'll get through this. With that, he nudged his horse forward, and Katherine followed, leaving the safety of the cabin behind as they rode into the vast Montana wilderness, the rising sun at their backs and an uncertain future ahead. They rode hard through the morning, Henry setting a pace that covered ground quickly while still preserving the horse's strength. He led them through dense pine forests and across shallow streams, occasionally doubling back or taking seemingly random turns. Breaking our trail, he explained when Katherine questioned one such detour, and avoiding the easier paths where we might be spotted. By midday, they had climbed higher into the foothills. Henry finally called a halt in a sheltered grove beside a small spring. While the horses drank, Katherine stretched her aching muscles, grateful for the rest despite her determination not to show weakness. You ride well, Henry commented as he pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. Most city women would be complaining by now. I'm not from the city, Katherine replied, accepting the offered food. I was born in Kentucky. We lived on horseback there. Henry's eyebrows rose slightly. What brought your family west? My mother died when I was 16. After that, my father couldn't bear to stay. He'd heard about the opportunities in Montana Territory. A sad smile touched her lips. He always dreamed big, said we'd build the finest horse ranch in the territory. I'm sorry about your father, Henry said, his voice gentler than she'd heard it before. He sounds like a good man. He was. Katherine blinked back tears. Stubborn and proud, but good. He didn't deserve to die that way. Henry was quiet for a moment. Few do. He took a drink from his canteen. This land breeds hard men, Miss Bennett. Some, like your father, stay decent despite it. Others become like Lawson. And which are you, Mr. Ashford? The question slipped out before she could stop it. His gray eyes met hers, unreadable. I'm still figuring that out. They finished their meal in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they prepared to continue, Henry suddenly froze, raising one hand in warning. Katherine instantly stilled, straining to hear what had alarmed him. The faint sound of voices drifted through the trees, still distant but approaching. Henry motioned Katherine toward the horses, his movements swift and silent now. They mounted quickly, and he led them deeper into the forest, away from the spring and the approaching men. For the next hour they rode in tense silence, taking the most difficult paths through the terrain. Only when Henry was certain they weren't being followed did he slow their pace. "Hunters?" Katherine asked hopefully. Henry shook his head. "Wrong season, wrong direction. Lawson's men are combing these hills." "They're persistent," Katherine murmured. "It's not just about the land anymore," Henry said grimly. "You're a witness to murder. That makes you dangerous to them." The reality of her situation struck Katherine anew. She wasn't just running from land grabbers, she was fleeing for her life from men who had already proven they would kill without hesitation. As the afternoon wore on, dark clouds gathered over the mountains, and the temperature dropped. By the time dusk approached, the first fat raindrops were beginning to fall. "We need shelter," Henry said, studying the darkening sky. "There's an old line shack about 2 miles north. It's not much, but it'll keep us dry." The rain was coming down steadily by the time they reached the dilapidated structure, little more than 4 walls and a roof, used by cowhands during seasonal roundups. Inside was dusty but dry, with a small fireplace and enough space for them and their gear. "No one's been here for months," Henry observed as he checked the corners. "Should be safe enough for the night." Katherine unsaddled her horse while Henry gathered wood for a small fire. The physical labor kept her mind occupied, preventing it from dwelling on the danger they faced, or the strange intimacy of sharing such close quarters with a man she barely knew. When Henry had the fire going, its warm glow transformed the shabby shack into something almost cozy. Katherine sat near the flames, suddenly aware of how cold and wet she had become. She shivered, wrapping her borrowed coat tighter around her body. Henry noticed. Without a word, he shrugged out of his duster and draped it over her shoulders. "I'm fine," she protested. "You're shivering," he countered. "I'm used to the cold." The coat carried his warmth and scent leather, pine, and something uniquely him. Katherine found it oddly comforting. "Thank you," she said softly. Henry nodded, then busied himself preparing a simple meal from their provisions. As they ate beans heated over the fire, the rain intensified, drumming against the roof and turning the world outside into a wall of water. "Storms setting in," Henry observed. "Might work in our favor. Rain will wash away our tracks." "How far to Helena now?" Katherine asked. 3 days if the weather holds. Longer if this keeps up." He glanced at her. "We'll need to be careful. Territory gets rougher from here." Katherine nodded, staring into the fire. After a moment, she asked, "Do you think I'll ever get my land back?" Henry considered before answering. "If the territorial marshal believes your story and if you have proof of ownership, there's a chance. The law out here isn't perfect, but it exists. And if not, then we find another way." His tone left no doubt that he meant it. Katherine looked at him curiously. "You keep saying we, Mr. Ashford. This isn't your fight." "I made it mine when I decided to help you," he replied simply. "I don't start things I don't intend to finish." There was something in his steady gaze that made Katherine's heart beat faster. She looked away, suddenly flustered. "You should get some sleep," Henry said after a moment. "I'll take first watch." "Wake me for the second," Katherine insisted. "You need rest too." Henry looked like he might argue, then nodded. 4 hours, then we switch." Katherine made herself as comfortable as possible on her bedroll, using her saddle as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound from the forest made her tense, expecting Lawson's men to appear at any moment. "They won't find us tonight," Henry said, as if reading her thoughts. "Not in this weather. Rest while you can." His quiet confidence was reassuring. Katherine closed her eyes, listening to the rain and the occasional snap of the fire. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the solid presence of Henry sitting by the doorway, rifle across his knees, keeping watch over her. She woke to Henry's hand on her shoulder, his voice low and urgent. "Someone's coming," he whispered. "One rider." Katherine was instantly alert, reaching for the pistol he'd given her. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Henry positioned himself by the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Katherine stood ready by the door, heart hammering in her chest. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then slowed. A man's voice called out, "Hello, the cabin." Henry and Katherine exchanged glances. The voice was unfamiliar to both of them. "Could be a trap," Henry mouthed silently. "Hello." The voice called again. "Anyone in there? I'm looking for shelter from this damned rain." Henry made a decision. "Stay inside," he murmured to Katherine. "Keep your gun ready." He moved to the door, opening it just enough to see out while keeping his body shielded. "Who's asking?" he called. "Name's Miller. James Miller. I'm a courier for the mining company in Bannack. Got caught in the storm coming back from Fort Benton." Henry studied the man for a long moment before opening the door wider. "Come on in, then. Weather's foul for traveling." The stranger who entered was middle-aged and weather-beaten, his clothes soaked through. He nodded gratefully to Henry, then stopped short when he saw Katherine, surprise evident on his face. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect to find a lady out here." "My wife and I are heading to Helena," Henry said before Katherine could speak. "Got caught in the same storm as you." Katherine kept her expression neutral, though her pulse quickened at Henry's casual claim. She understood immediately a married couple would draw less suspicion than an unmarried man and woman traveling alone. "Lucky you found shelter," Miller said, moving toward the fire with obvious relief. "Mind if I warm up a bit?" "Help yourself," Henry replied, his tone friendly but his eyes watchful. "Coffee's hot if you want some." "Much obliged." As Miller dried himself by the fire, he chatted easily about his journey and the weather. He seemed genuine enough, but Katherine noticed that Henry kept himself between the stranger and her, his hand never far from his weapon. "What takes you folks to Helena?" Miller asked eventually. "Not many people heading that direction this time of year." "Family business," Henry answered smoothly. "My wife's brother is ill." Miller nodded sympathetically. "Sorry to hear that, madam." He glanced outside where the sky was lightening. "Rain's letting up. I should get moving if I want to make Bannack by nightfall." "Safe travels," Henry said, the politeness in his voice not quite reaching his eyes. Once Miller had departed, Katherine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Do you think he suspected anything?" Henry shook his head. "Don't think so, just a man caught in the rain." He began gathering their belongings. "But we should move on anyway. Can't be too careful." As they saddled the horses, Katherine found herself thinking about Henry's quick lie. "So I'm your wife now, am I?" she asked, attempting to sound lighthearted. Henry's hands paused on his saddle cinch. Seemed the simplest explanation. Less questions that way. He glanced at her. "Hope you don't mind." "No," Katherine said. It was quick thinking. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Besides, no one would believe I'd let a woman as pretty as you travel alone without being related somehow." The unexpected compliment brought warmth to Katherine's cheeks. Before she could respond, Henry had mounted his horse and was already moving out, leaving her to follow with her thoughts in surprising disarray. They rode through the day, making good time now that the rain had stopped. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they climbed higher into the mountains, following game trails and narrow passes that Henry seemed to know by instinct. By late afternoon, they had reached a vantage point that offered a sweeping view of the valley below. Henry reined in his horse and dismounted, taking out a small spyglass to survey the landscape. "See something?" Katherine asked, joining him. Henry handed her the glass. "Two riders following the creek, about 3 miles back." Katherine looked where he indicated, her stomach tightening when she spotted the distant figures. "Lawson's men, can't be sure, but we should assume they are." Henry's expression was grim. "They're moving fast, must have picked up our trail somehow." Katherine lowered the glass, fear rising in her throat. "What do we do?" Henry studied the terrain ahead. "There's a canyon about 2 hours' ride from here, narrow with high walls, only one way in, one way out." "Sounds like a trap," Katherine said warily. "For them, not us." Henry's eyes gleamed with a sudden fierceness. "If we can draw them in, we can ambush them, turn the hunters into the hunted." Katherine stared at him. "You want to fight them? There are 2 of them and 2 of us, and they're professional killers." "We have the advantage of position," Henry argued. "And surprise. They're expecting frightened prey, not prepared opponents." "It's too dangerous," Katherine insisted. "We should just keep moving toward Helena." Henry considered her words, then nodded slowly. "You're right. Fighting unnecessarily is a risk we don't need to take." He took the spyglass back, taking one more look at their pursuers. "We'll push on to the north, try to lose them in the higher passes." Relief flooded through Katherine. She had seen enough violence to last a lifetime. They rode hard for the next 2 hours, pushing their horses as much as they dared on the difficult terrain. As dusk approached, they reached a swift flowing river, swollen with rainwater. "We need to cross here," Henry said, studying the churning water. "It's our best chance to break the trail. The current will wash away any trace of our passing." Katherine eyed the river anxiously. "Is it safe? We'll find out," Henry replied, not entirely reassuring. He led the way, guiding his horse carefully into the water. The powerful animal struggled against the current, but maintained its footing on the rocky riverbed. Katherine followed, her heart in her throat as the cold water rose to her stirrups. Halfway across, her horse stumbled on a slippery rock. Katherine gasped as she felt herself sliding from the saddle. Before she could fall, Henry's hand shot out, gripping her arm firmly and steadying her. Their eyes met across the rushing water, his face taut with concern. Katherine regained her seat, and they continued, emerging safely on the opposite bank moments later. "Thank you," she said breathlessly once they were on dry ground. Henry nodded, scanning the river behind them. "We should be clear now, no tracks to follow." He glanced at the darkening sky. "We need to find a place to camp. You're soaked through." They made camp in a sheltered grove of pines. Henry insisted Katherine change into dry clothes while he turned his back, building a small, smokeless fire that would be difficult to spot from a distance. The chill of the river had seeped into Katherine's bones, and she huddled gratefully near the flames. "Here," Henry said, handing her a flask. "Whiskey, just a sip. It'll warm you up." Katherine took a cautious swallow, gasping as the liquor burned down her throat. "That's potent." A rare smile crossed Henry's face. "Carter Ranch Special Reserve." As warmth spread through her body, Katherine found herself studying Henry in the firelight. With his guard slightly lowered, he looked younger, the hard lines of his face softened by the golden glow. "May I ask you something?" she ventured. Henry glanced up from tending the fire. "You can ask." "What will you do after this? After we reach Helena?" The question seemed to surprise him. He was silent for a long moment. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "You'll go back to the ranch." Henry poked at the fire with a stick. "I suppose so. It's been my life for 5 years now." "Do you like it there?" Katherine pressed, curious about this man who had risked so much for her. "It's honest work," he replied. "The ranch hands are good men. Carter's fair." He shrugged. "It's as close to a home as I've had since before the war." There was something in his voice, a loneliness, perhaps, that touched Katherine deeply. "You never thought of settling down, having a place of your own?" Henry's eyes met hers across the fire. "Once. A long time ago." He fell silent, and Katherine sensed he wouldn't elaborate further. They ate a simple dinner of jerky and dried fruit, then prepared for the night. Henry insisted on taking first watch again, despite Katherine's protests that he had barely slept the night before. "I'm used to it," he said. "Sleep while you can." This time, exhaustion claimed her quickly. She drifted off to the sound of crickets and the soft popping of the fire, feeling oddly safe despite the danger that pursued them. She woke some hours later to find Henry still awake, staring into the dying embers of the fire. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, his profile was strong and somber. "You were supposed to wake me," she chided softly, sitting up. Henry startled slightly, turning to her. "You needed the rest. So do you." Katherine moved to sit beside him on the fallen log he'd been using as a seat. "I can keep watch now." He looked as if he might argue, then nodded wearily. "Wake me at first light." As he settled onto his bedroll, Katherine took up his rifle, resting it across her knees as she had seen him do. The night was peaceful, with only the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. She found herself watching Henry as he slept, struck by how vulnerable he looked, this man who had been so strong and capable since the moment she'd stumbled onto his porch. In sleep, the worry lines between his brows smoothed out and his mouth relaxed from its usual firm line. Katherine realized with a start that she was beginning to care for him, this stranger who had become her protector, her guide, her only ally in a world that had suddenly turned hostile. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Morning came with a pearly mist rising from the damp earth. Katherine let Henry sleep a little longer than he'd asked, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky with gold and pink. When she finally woke him, he seemed momentarily disoriented, then immediately alert. "You should have woken me earlier," he said, sitting up quickly. "The world didn't end because you got an extra hour of sleep," Katherine replied with a small smile. They broke camp efficiently, leaving as little trace of their presence as possible. As they prepared to mount up, Henry paused, studying the terrain ahead. "We'll reach the main trail to Helena by nightfall," he said. "From there, it's a straight shot to the city. But that's also where we're most likely to encounter trouble." "You think Lawson will have men watching the trail?" Henry nodded grimly. "I would if I were him." He tightened his saddle cinch with a sharp tug. "We'll skirt around, approach from the east instead of the south. Take a bit longer, but safer." They rode in companionable silence for much of the morning, the horses picking their way through rocky terrain that gradually gave way to more open country. By midday, they had reached a high meadow dotted with wildflowers, a welcome change from the dense forest. "We'll rest the horses here," Henry decided, dismounting near a small stream. As they watered the animals, Katherine found herself wondering about the life she had left behind and what might lie ahead. Her father was gone, their ranch likely already claimed by Lawson. Even if the territorial marshal believed her story, what would she return to? "What's on your mind?" Henry asked, noticing her pensive expression. Katherine sighed. "Just wondering what happens after. If we make it to Helena, if the marshal believes me, what then? I have no family left, no home to return to." Henry studied her for a moment. "You could start over. Plenty of opportunity in the territory for someone with your spirit." "My spirit?" Katherine raised an eyebrow. "Courage," Henry clarified. "Not everyone would have survived what you've been through these past days." The compliment warmed her, but uncertainty still gnawed. Starting over takes resources. All I had was tied up in the ranch. Henry was quiet for a long moment. When we reach Helena, I have a little money saved. It's yours if you need it. Katherine stared at him, stunned by the offer. Henry, I couldn't possibly. You can pay me back someday, he interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. When you're on your feet again. Before she could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the meadow. Henry's body jerked and he stumbled forward, a look of surprise crossing his face before he collapsed to one knee. "Henry," Katherine cried, rushing to him. "Get down," he gasped, pushing her roughly to the ground as another shot whistled over their heads. Katherine saw the dark stain spreading across his left shoulder. "You're hit." "Just grazed," he grimaced, though his face had gone pale. "We need cover. Now." More shots rang out as they scrambled toward a cluster of boulders at the edge of the meadow, staying low in the tall grass. The horses, spooked by the gunfire, had bolted toward the tree line. From the safety of the rocks, Henry peered cautiously at the ridge where the shots had originated. "2 shooters," he muttered. "Maybe 3. Katherine's hands trembled as she tore a strip from her shirt to press against his bleeding shoulder. "How did they find us?" "Must have been tracking us longer than we thought," Henry said through gritted teeth. "Waited until we were in the open." Another shot ricocheted off the boulder near their heads, sending rock fragments flying. Katherine flinched but kept pressure on Henry's wound. "They're trying to pin us down," Henry said, reaching for his rifle with his good arm. "Keep us here until they can circle around." "What do we do?" Katherine asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Henry checked his ammunition. "I'll hold them off. You make a run for the trees." "I'm not leaving you," Katherine said fiercely. "This isn't a debate, Katherine," he snapped. "One of us needs to get out of here and you're not shot." The use of her first name the first time he'd said it made her pause, but her resolve remained firm. "We go together or not at all." Henry looked as if he might argue further, then his expression changed. "Give me your bandana," he said suddenly. Confused, Katherine handed him the cloth she'd used to tie her hair back. Henry quickly tied it to the barrel of his rifle, then carefully raised it above the boulder. Immediately, a shot rang out, striking the cloth. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Making them think they hit me," Henry replied. "It's an old trick. Might buy us a little time." He winced as he shifted position, clearly in more pain than he was admitting. Katherine bit her lip, knowing they couldn't stay pinned down much longer. Henry needed medical attention, and their attackers would eventually work their way around to flank them. "The horses," she said suddenly. "If we can reach them, too exposed," Henry said, shaking his head. "We'd be cut down before we got halfway there." Katherine scanned their surroundings desperately, searching for any avenue of escape. Her gaze fell on the stream that cut through the meadow, disappearing into the forest. "The water," she said. "If we follow the stream into the trees, the banks might give us enough cover." Henry followed her gaze, considering. "It's risky, but better than waiting here to die." He checked his revolver. "I'll lay down covering fire. When I say go, you run for the stream. Stay low, move fast." "We go together," Katherine insisted again. Henry's gray eyes locked with hers, and something passed between them, an understanding, a recognition. "Together," he agreed quietly. They positioned themselves at the edge of their rocky shelter, Henry's rifle ready. "On my count," he murmured. 3, 2, 1, go." Henry fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge as they broke cover, running in a low crouch toward the stream. Bullets kicked up dirt around their feet as they scrambled down the bank and into the shallow water. The cold shock hit Katherine's legs as they splashed through the stream, hunched over to use the banks as cover. Henry was breathing hard, his face contorted with pain but his movements still purposeful. They had covered perhaps 50 yards when a bullet struck the water beside them, sending up a spray. Katherine stumbled, and Henry caught her arm, pulling her forward. The trees were just ahead, promising better cover. As they reached the forest edge, Henry suddenly pushed Katherine forward with surprising force. She fell to her hands and knees in the water as a shot cracked through the air where she had been standing a moment before. Henry staggered, then collapsed into the stream beside her. "Henry." Katherine crawled to him, horror struck at the fresh blood staining the water around him. "Keep going," he gasped, clutching his side. "Don't stop." "Not without you," she said, tears blurring her vision as she helped him to his feet. Henry leaned heavily against her, but somehow they managed to stagger deeper into the forest, following the stream until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. When Henry could go no farther, they collapsed in a sheltered hollow beneath the roots of a massive fallen tree. Katherine frantically examined his injuries. The graze on his shoulder was minor, but the second bullet had struck him in the side, just below his ribs. "How bad?" he asked through clenched teeth. Katherine's hands shook as she carefully pulled away his blood-soaked shirt. "The bullet went through." "That's good, I think." She tore more strips from her shirt to make bandages. "We need to stop the bleeding." Henry nodded, his face ashen. "Saddlebags," he muttered. "Lost them with the horses." "I know." Katherine pressed the makeshift bandage against his wound. "Hold this here, press hard." While Henry maintained pressure on his injury, Katherine searched their immediate surroundings, desperate for anything that might help. She found a fallen pine branch and broke off several small pieces of the bark. "Chew on this," she instructed, handing a piece to Henry. "My father said pine bark has properties that fight infection and ease pain." Henry took it without question, grimacing at the bitter taste. "We need to find shelter," Katherine said, looking at the darkening sky. "Night's coming and you need rest." Henry's eyes were becoming unfocused. "Trapper's cabin," he mumbled. "About a mile northeast, abandoned. Used it once. Hunting." Katherine helped him to his feet, supporting much of his weight as they made slow progress through the forest. Each step seemed to cost Henry tremendous effort, but he remained conscious, stubbornly putting one foot in front of the other. Dusk was falling when they finally spotted the cabin, little more than a crude wooden shack tucked against a hillside. It was smaller than the lined shack they'd used previously, with one small window and a door hanging crookedly on leather hinges. Inside, it was dusty and abandoned, containing only a crude wooden platform that had once served as a bed, a rough table, and a small fireplace. Katherine helped Henry to the bed platform, then set about gathering materials to start a fire. "Save your strength," she told him when he tried to help. "You've lost a lot of blood." Once she had a small fire going, Katherine carefully removed Henry's blood-soaked shirt to better assess his wounds. The bullet hole in his side looked angry and painful, but the bleeding had slowed to a seep rather than a flow. His shoulder was already forming a dark bruise around the graze. "You're lucky," she said, cleaning both injuries as best she could with water heated over the fire. "A few inches difference and—" "Not luck," Henry murmured, his eyes finding hers in the firelight. You saved my life out there." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. "You've been saving mine since the moment we met." When she had done all she could for his wounds, Katherine made Henry as comfortable as possible on the hard platform. She sat beside him, her back against the wall, keeping watch as he drifted into an uneasy sleep. Outside, night settled fully over the forest. Katherine listened to every sound, alert for any sign of pursuit, but heard only the normal nocturnal chorus of insects and the occasional hoot of an owl. Henry stirred restlessly in his sleep, mumbling words she couldn't catch. Once, he called out a name that might have been Elizabeth, his lost sister, Katherine guessed. She gently brushed sweat-dampened hair from his forehead, alarmed at the heat radiating from his skin. Fever. The enemy she had feared. Without proper medicine, infection could kill Henry as surely as another bullet. Morning found Katherine exhausted but resolute. Henry's fever had risen through the night, and he alternated between restless sleep and periods of confused wakefulness. "We need to get to Helena," she told him during one of his lucid moments. "You need a doctor." Henry shook his head weakly. "Too far you go. Get help." "I'm not leaving you," Katherine said firmly. "We're in this together, remember?" A ghost of a smile touched his pale lips. "Stubborn woman." "You have no idea," she replied, trying to sound confident despite her fear. Katherine spent the morning searching the surrounding area, hoping to find useful herbs or perhaps even sign of their horses. She had little luck with either, though she did discover a small spring with clean water not far from the cabin. Returning with fresh water, she found Henry sitting up, looking marginally better despite the fever that still burned in his eyes. "Any sign of them?" he asked as she entered. Katherine shook her head. "No, I think we lost them yesterday." "For now," Henry agreed, "but they'll keep searching. Lawson isn't a man who gives up easily." Katherine wet a cloth and pressed it to his forehead. "Why is this land so important to him?" "There must be easier targets than a small ranch." Henry leaned back, closing his eyes as the cool cloth brought momentary relief. "It's not just about the land. Never is with men like Lawson." He paused, gathering his strength. "Control, power. They take because they can, and because each time they do, it proves something to them." "What a hollow existence," Katherine murmured. "But a dangerous one," Henry cautioned. "Never underestimate a man who measures his worth by what he can take from others." They passed the day quietly, with Katherine tending to Henry's wounds and making several trips to the spring for fresh water. By evening, his fever seemed to have stabilized, though it hadn't broken. As Katherine prepared a meager meal from the few edible plants she had identified, Henry watched her from the bed platform, his gaze thoughtful. "Why didn't you marry?" he asked suddenly. The question caught Katherine off guard. "What makes you think I didn't?" "No ring." "And you introduced yourself as Miss Bennett." Katherine smiled faintly. "Observant." She stirred the pot of plant broth, considering her answer. "There were suitors back in Kentucky, none that I cared for, and after we came west." She shrugged. "My father needed me. The ranch needed me. It was enough. No regrets." She looked at him, really looked at him, this man who had come into her life so suddenly and changed everything. "Not until recently." Something flickered in Henry's fever-bright eyes, understanding, perhaps, or a reflection of her own feelings. Before either could speak again, a sound outside the cabin froze them both. Hoofbeats. More than one horse. Katherine moved swiftly to extinguish the fire while Henry struggled to sit up, reaching for his revolver. "Stay down," she whispered, taking the gun from him. "You're in no condition to fight." She positioned herself beside the small window, peering cautiously through a crack in the shutters. In the fading light, she could make out two riders approaching the cabin slowly, their horses picking a careful path through the trees. "Lawson's men?" Henry asked, his voice barely audible. Katherine squinted, trying to make out details in the twilight. "I don't think so. Different horses." As the riders drew nearer, she could see they were dressed in the uniform of U.S. Marshals. Hope surged within her, but caution kept her silent. It could be a trick. The lead rider dismounted, approaching the cabin with his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Hello, the cabin," he called. "Anyone inside?" Katherine glanced at Henry, who nodded slightly. "Who's asking?" she called back, keeping the revolver ready. "Deputy Marshal James Wilson," the man replied. "We're looking for a woman named Katherine Bennett." Katherine's breath caught. "What business do you have with her?" "We received a telegraph from the sheriff in Concord," Wilson said. "There's been some trouble there. We'd like to speak with her if she's willing." Katherine and Henry exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. This could be a trap. Sheriff Davis was Lawson's cousin. "How do I know you're really marshals?" Katherine called. The deputy didn't seem offended by her suspicion. "Madam, I understand your caution. We've got badges and papers if you'd care to see them. We can slide them under the door if you prefer." After a tense moment, Katherine made her decision. "Slide your credentials under the door, both of you." She watched as the deputy spoke to his companion, who also dismounted. Both men approached the cabin slowly, removing documents from their coat pockets and kneeling to slide them beneath the door. Katherine retrieved the papers, examining them in the dim light. They appeared genuine official appointment documents for Deputy Marshals James Wilson and Thomas Clark, complete with territorial seals. "All right," she said finally. "I'm Katherine Bennett, but I'm not alone, and we've had some trouble with men hunting us." "We know, madam," Wilson replied. "That's partly why we're here. May we come in?" Katherine opened the door cautiously, the revolver still in her hand. The two men who entered were indeed wearing marshals' badges, both looking trail-worn and tired. They removed their hats respectfully, taking in the scene: Henry on the bed platform, clearly wounded, and Katherine standing protectively near him. "What happened here?" the younger Marshal, Clark, asked. "We were ambushed yesterday," Katherine explained. "Mr. Ashford was shot. He needs a doctor." Wilson nodded to his partner, who immediately went back outside, presumably to prepare medical supplies. "We can help with that, madam. We've got basic medical training and supplies with us." "How did you find us?" Henry asked weakly from the bed. Wilson turned to him. "We've been tracking Lawson's gang for 2 weeks. Got reports they were seen near Concord, then heard about the murder of Jonathan Bennett. When we arrived in town, the sheriff was suspiciously unhelpful." His mouth tightened. "Then we got word that Lawson's men were hunting a woman through the mountains. Wasn't hard to put it together." "But how did you find this cabin?" Katherine pressed. "Luck, mostly," Wilson admitted. "We found your horses yesterday evening, still saddled. Figured you couldn't have gone far on foot, especially if one of you was injured. Started checking all the known shelters in the area." Clark returned with a medical kit and canteen. With Katherine's assistance, they cleaned Henry's wounds properly and applied antiseptic and fresh bandages. The young marshal also produced a bottle of laudanum for the pain. "The bullet wound is clean," Clark said after examining Henry. "No signs of major infection yet, but that fever needs watching. He should rest at least a day before attempting the ride to Helena." While Clark tended to Henry, Wilson spoke with Katherine, listening intently as she recounted the events at her father's ranch and their subsequent flight from Lawson's men. "This matches what we've been hearing about Lawson," the deputy said grimly. "Land fraud, intimidation, murder. He's been operating with impunity for too long, partly because of his connections to local law enforcement." "Like Sheriff Davis," Katherine said bitterly. Wilson nodded. "Davis will be investigated too, but our main target is Lawson. Your testimony could be crucial in bringing him to justice, Miss Bennett." "I'll testify," Katherine said firmly. "I want him to pay for what he did to my father." The marshals stayed the night at the cabin, taking turns standing watch outside. With proper medication, Henry's fever began to subside, and by morning he was able to sit up and take some food. "The marshals want to leave tomorrow," Katherine told him as she brought him a cup of broth. "Think you'll be strong enough to ride?" Henry nodded, though he still looked pale. "I've ridden with worse." He caught her skeptical look. "Don't worry, I'm not about to die on you now after all this. See that you don't," she said softly. "I'm rather getting used to having you around. A smile touched his lips. "That's so." Before she could respond, Deputy Wilson entered the cabin. "Miss Bennett, could I have a word?" Katherine followed him outside, where the morning sun was warming the small clearing around the cabin. "We've been discussing your situation," Wilson said. "Once we reach Helena, you'll need to give your formal statement to the territorial marshal. There will likely be a federal investigation, given the nature of the crimes." "What about my father's ranch?" Katherine asked. Wilson's expression grew sympathetic. "That's more complicated. If Lawson's men have already taken possession, it might require legal action to reclaim it. The territorial courts can be slow." "I see," Katherine said, her heart sinking. "There's something else," the deputy continued. "Until Lawson is apprehended, you could still be in danger. The marshal's office can arrange protection for you in Helena." "For how long?" Wilson shrugged. "Hard to say. These cases can drag on." Katherine's mind raced, considering her options. The thought of spending months in Helena, essentially in hiding, waiting for justice that might never come, was disheartening. But what alternative did she have? When she returned to the cabin, Henry was watching her closely. "Bad news?" he asked, reading her expression. Katherine sighed, sitting beside him on the edge of the bed platform. "Not bad exactly, just uncertain." She explained what Wilson had told her. Henry was quiet for a long moment. "What will you do?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no home to return to, no family, little money." She trailed off, the full weight of her situation settling over her. "Remember what I said before," Henry said quietly, "about helping you get started again." Katherine shook her head. "That's generous, but I can't take your savings, Henry. You've already given so much." He reached out, taking her hand in his. The gesture was so unexpected, so gentle, that Katherine found herself momentarily speechless. "I've been thinking," Henry said, his voice low and serious. "These past days, traveling with you, protecting you. It's the first time in years I've felt I was doing something that mattered." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I don't want to go back to the way things were before." Katherine's heart beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when this is over, when you've given your testimony and Lawson is brought to justice, maybe we could start something new, together." The hope in his gray eyes made Katherine's throat tighten with emotion. "Henry, we barely know each other." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I know you're the bravest woman I've ever met. I know you're kind and resourceful. I know that when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I have since before the war." His fingers tightened around hers. "The rest, we can learn along the way." Katherine found herself speechless, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his voice and the unexpected direction her life had taken. A week ago, she had been a rancher's daughter with a predictable future. Now, here she was, contemplating a new life with a man she had known for mere days, a man who had saved her life, and whose life she had saved in turn. "I'm not asking for an answer now," Henry continued softly. "Just think about it. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it." Before Katherine could respond, the cabin door opened, and Deputy Clark entered. The moment between them broke, but the warmth of Henry's hand lingered on hers long after she'd pulled away. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Henry was much improved, his fever gone and his strength returning, though he still moved gingerly to avoid aggravating his wounds. The marshals had brought spare horses, so they were able to mount up and begin the journey to Helena. Wilson estimated it would take a full day of riding to reach the city. As they set out, Katherine found herself riding beside Henry, the marshals leading the way down the narrow mountain trail. "How are you feeling?" she asked, noting the tight lines around his mouth that betrayed his discomfort. "I'll manage," he replied. Then, with a sidelong glance, Thinking about what I said last night, Katherine couldn't help but smile. It's hard to think of anything else. And his voice was carefully neutral, but she could sense the tension beneath it. Katherine looked ahead at the winding trail that would lead them to Helena and to whatever future awaited her there. I think, she said slowly, that when a person has lost everything, they become very careful about what they choose to hold on to next. Henry's expression fell slightly, and she realized he had misunderstood. But, she continued, meeting his eyes, I also think that sometimes the most unexpected things are worth holding on to the tightest. The hope that dawned in his eyes was answer enough for now. They rode on in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of what might lie ahead. The journey to Helena passed without incident. By late afternoon, they crested a final ridge, and the city spread before them in the valley below a sprawling collection of buildings that made Katherine realize how isolated she had been on her father's ranch. We'll take you directly to the marshal's office, Wilson informed them as they descended toward the city. Marshal Thornton will want to hear your statement immediately. Katherine nodded, suddenly nervous about the official proceedings that awaited her. As if sensing her anxiety, Henry rode closer, his presence reassuring. I'll be with you, he said quietly, every step of the way. The territorial marshal's office was located in a solid brick building in the center of Helena. Inside, they were led to a spacious office where Marshal Thornton, a gray-haired, imposing man with a neatly trimmed beard, listened intently as Katherine recounted her story. This is serious business, Miss Bennett, he said when she had finished. Land fraud, corruption, murder. These are federal crimes. I'll be telegraphing the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington immediately. What about Lawson? Henry asked. He's still out there, still dangerous. Thornton nodded grimly. I'm organizing a posse to ride out at first light. With Miss Bennett's testimony and the evidence my deputies have gathered, we have more than enough to arrest him and his entire gang. He turned to Katherine. In the meantime, you'll need a safe place to stay. We can arrange lodging at a boarding house with a guard posted. She'll be staying with me, Henry said firmly. When all eyes turned to him in surprise, he added, at my sister's house. She lives here in Helena with her husband. It's secure, and no one will think to look for Miss Bennett there. Katherine stared at him, puzzled. He had told her his sister was dead. Marshal Thornton seemed satisfied with this arrangement. Very well. Deputy Wilson will escort you there. I'd like you both back here tomorrow afternoon to finalize your statements. Outside the marshal's office, Katherine pulled Henry aside. Your sister? I thought my brother-in-law remarried, Henry explained quietly. Sarah, his new wife, was a friend of Elizabeth's. They'll help us, I'm certain of it. Katherine studied him, sensing there was more to the story, but the presence of Deputy Wilson prevented further discussion. Henry directed them to a modest but well-maintained house on a quiet street near the edge of town. A tall, somber man answered the door, his expression shifting from surprise to emotion when he saw Henry. Henry, he said, his voice thick. It's been too long. Hello, Thomas, Henry replied. We need your help. Inside, they were introduced to Sarah, a kind-faced woman who immediately set about making them comfortable. While Deputy Wilson spoke privately with Thomas and Henry explained their situation to Sarah, Katherine took the opportunity to observe this unexpected connection from Henry's past. There was history here complex and painful, judging by the careful way Henry and Thomas interacted. Yet beneath the awkwardness was a clear bond of respect, perhaps even love. After the deputy departed, promising to return in the morning, Sarah showed Katherine to a small but comfortable guest room. You'll be safe here, she assured her. Thomas is well respected in Helena. No one will trouble you. "Thank you," Katherine said sincerely. "I'm sorry to impose like this." "Nonsense," Sarah replied with a warm smile. "Any friend of Henry's is welcome here. He's family, even if he's too stubborn to admit it most of the time." When Katherine returned to the parlor, she found Henry alone, standing by the window with a distant expression. "Your brother-in-law seems like a good man," she said. Henry nodded without turning. "He is. He made Elizabeth happy." Katherine moved to stand beside him. "Why did you stay away?" Henry's jaw tightened. "After Elizabeth died, I couldn't. I blamed myself for not being there, for not protecting her." He exhaled slowly. "Thomas never held it against me, but I held it against myself." "And now?" Katherine asked softly. Henry finally looked at her, his eyes revealing a vulnerability she had rarely seen in him. "Now I understand that sometimes protecting the people you care about means being there when it matters most, not before or after." He paused. "You taught me that, Katherine." The tenderness in his voice made her heart swell. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers gently tracing the scar along his jaw. "We protect each other," she whispered. "That's what matters." For a moment, Katherine thought he might kiss her. Instead, he covered her hand with his own, holding it against his cheek in a gesture that felt more intimate than any kiss could have been. The moment was interrupted by Thomas's return to the parlor. They moved apart, but something had changed between them, a silent understanding, a promise for later. The next morning brought news. A messenger from the marshal's office arrived with word that the posse had departed at dawn, heading for Lawson's known hideout near the border of the territory. "It could be days before they return," Thomas told them over breakfast. "The marshal asks that you remain in Helena until then." Henry and Katherine exchanged glances. Days of waiting, of uncertainty. But also days together, away from the immediate danger that had defined their relationship thus far. "I should check on my horse," Henry said after breakfast. "And we'll need supplies if we're to stay in Helena for a while." "I'll come with you," Katherine offered quickly, eager to escape the confines of the house. Thomas looked concerned. "Is that wise, if Lawson has men in the city?" "We'll be careful," Henry assured him. "Stay in crowded areas, avoid drawing attention." The streets of Helena were busy with morning activity, miners heading to the nearby diggings, merchants opening their shops, wagons delivering goods from the railroad station. Katherine, dressed in clothes borrowed from Sarah, attracted little notice as she walked beside Henry through the town. At the livery stable, Henry checked on his chestnut gelding, which the marshals had recovered and brought to Helena. The horse greeted him with a soft whicker of recognition. "He missed you," Katherine observed, smiling as the animal nuzzled Henry's palm. "Feels strange to be in a city again," Henry remarked as they left the stable. "Been so long since I've been around this many people." "Do you dislike it?" Katherine asked, curious about this aspect of his character. Henry considered. "Not dislike exactly, just prefer open spaces. Room to breathe." He glanced at her. "What about you? Would you be happy in a place like this?" The question carried weight beyond idle curiosity. Katherine thought carefully before answering. "I've never been much for city life," she admitted. "I love the land too much, the mountains, the forests. But I also know that safety and opportunity matter." She paused. "The right place depends on who you're with, not just where you are." Henry's eyes warmed at her words. As they continued down the street, his hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally. The simple gesture felt significant, a public acknowledgement of whatever was growing between them. They spent the day exploring Helena, gradually relaxing as it became clear they weren't being followed or watched. Henry purchased supplies they might need for the journey back to Concord, whenever that might be possible. Katherine found herself drawn to a small bookshop, where she selected a volume of poetry with money Henry insisted she take. "Consider it an advance on what I promised before," he said when she protested. By the time they returned to Thomas and Sarah's home, a comfortable ease had developed between them. That evening, as they sat in the parlor after dinner, Thomas shared stories about Elizabeth that made Henry both smile and grow quiet with remembered grief. "She would have liked you," Thomas told Katherine. "She always said Henry needed someone who could match his stubbornness." Henry rolled his eyes, but there was affection in the gesture. "She would have liked you," he agreed softly. "She had a gift for seeing the good in people." Later, as the household prepared for bed, Katherine found Henry on the small back porch, looking up at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, joining him. "Just thinking about chances," he replied. "How sometimes the worst days of your life can lead to the best ones." Katherine leaned against the porch railing beside him. "Is that what happened with us? The worst day of my life leading to something better?" Henry turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I can't change what happened to your father, Katherine. I wish I could. But I can promise you that as long as I'm breathing, you'll never face another worst day alone." The simple sincerity of his words moved her deeply. Katherine stepped closer, eliminating the small space between them. "I've been thinking about what you said," she murmured. "About starting something new together." Henry's breath caught, and, instead of answering with words, Katherine rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened as Henry's arms encircled her, pulling her against him. When they finally parted, both breathless, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "I take it that's a yes," Katherine laughed softly. "It's a yes. Whatever comes next, we face it together." They spent 3 more days in Helena, each passing hour strengthening the bond between them. On the morning of the 4th day, a messenger arrived with urgent news. The marshal's posse had returned with Lawson and his gang in custody. At the marshal's office, they found a scene of controlled chaos. Deputies were processing prisoners, taking statements and cataloging evidence. Marshal Thornton met them in his office, looking tired but satisfied. "We got them," he announced. "All of them, including Sheriff Davis. Found them at Lawson's camp near the border. There was some resistance, but no casualties on our side." His expression grew grimmer. "We also found evidence linking them to 3 other land frauds and at least 2 more murders besides your father's, Miss Bennett." Katherine felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, grief, a sense of justice partially served. "What happens now? Lawson and his men will stand trial here in Helena," Thornton explained. "With your testimony and the evidence we've gathered, I expect they'll hang for their crimes." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "As for your father's property, I've issued orders for it to be returned to your possession immediately. Deputy Wilson will escort you back to Concord whenever you're ready." Katherine glanced at Henry, who had been silent throughout the exchange. "What about Mr. Ashford?" she asked. "He's as much a part of this as I am." Marshal Thornton nodded. "The territory owes you both a debt of gratitude. If there's anything else I can do." Henry straightened. "Actually, there is, Marshal." His voice was steady, decisive. "I'd like to tender my resignation from the Carter Ranch, effective immediately." Katherine looked at him in surprise. They had discussed possibilities for the future, but Henry hadn't mentioned leaving his job. "Got other plans, Ashford?" Thornton asked, raising an eyebrow. Henry's hand found Katherine's, his grip warm and sure. "Yes, sir, I do." The journey back to Concord took 2 days, with Deputy Wilson and another marshal accompanying them for protection. As they crested the final hill overlooking the Bennett Ranch, Katherine felt a surge of conflicting emotions: sadness at the memories of her father, anxiety about what they might find, hope for what could be. The ranch house stood as she had left it, though the door hung broken on its hinges, and signs of Lawson's occupation were evident in the trampled garden and scattered debris. Inside was worse furniture overturned, her father's belongings strewn about carelessly. "We'll set it right," Henry said quietly, standing beside her in the doorway. "All of it." Katherine nodded, blinking back tears. "Yes, we will." The days that followed were filled with hard work. The marshals stayed for a week, helping to restore order to the ranch and ensuring that news of Lawson's capture spread throughout the area. Neighbors Katherine hadn't seen since her father's murder began to visit, offering condolences and assistance. Henry proved invaluable, his knowledge of ranching and quiet strength supporting Katherine through the difficult process of reclaiming her home. They fell into an easy rhythm together, working side by side during the day and planning for the future in the evenings. "The north pasture could support twice the horses we have now," Henry observed one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "With your knowledge of breeding and my contacts from the Carter Ranch, we could build something special here." Katherine smiled at his enthusiasm. "Our own horse ranch. If that's what you want," Henry said, suddenly uncertain. "I know we haven't discussed formalities." Katherine turned to look at him, amused by his sudden awkwardness. "Henry Ashford, are you trying to propose to me?" A flush crept up his neck. "Doing a poor job of it, apparently." She laughed softly, taking his hand. "Ask me properly and find out." Henry's expression grew serious. He shifted on the porch step to face her, still holding her hand. "Katherine Bennett, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you here or anywhere else you want to go." He paused, his gray eyes earnest. "Will you marry me?" Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears for once. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." The simple gold band Henry placed on her finger the next day wasn't fancy, but it represented everything Katherine had thought she'd lost: family, home, future. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Concord Church, with Thomas and Sarah making the journey from Helena to stand with them. As summer turned to autumn, Katherine and Henry worked tirelessly to rebuild the Bennett Ranch. They repaired fences, expanded the corral, and purchased new breeding stock with the money Henry had saved. Katherine planted a small garden near her father's grave, a quiet place to remember him and to celebrate the new life that had unexpectedly grown from her loss. Word of their quality horses began to spread, bringing buyers from as far away as Colorado and Wyoming. By the following spring, the renamed Ashford Ranch was becoming known throughout the territory for its fine stock. One evening in May, as they sat on the same porch where Henry had proposed, Katherine rested her head against her husband's shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Very," she replied, placing his hand over her slightly rounded belly. "Especially since we'll need to build that new bedroom sooner than we planned." Henry stilled, then turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "Are you saying?" Katherine nodded, smiling at his expression. "Come November, there will be 3 of us." The joy that spread across Henry's face was everything Katherine could have hoped for. As he pulled her into a gentle embrace, whispering words of love and amazement, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From that terrifying night when she had stumbled onto his porch, fleeing for her life, to this moment of perfect contentment, it was a path neither of them could have foreseen. The danger that had thrown them together had long passed, but the bond it forged had only grown stronger with time. Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Henry's hand protectively covering her stomach, Katherine thought about the strange workings of fate. How running from death had led her straight to a love that would sustain her for a lifetime. "What are you thinking about?" Henry murmured against her hair. Katherine smiled in the darkness. "About how sometimes the best things in life find you when you're not looking for them." Henry's arms tightened around her. "Like a stubborn, beautiful woman appearing on my doorstep in the rain. Like a brave, honorable man who kept his promise to keep me safe," she countered softly. As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that this was where she belonged, not just on this land that had been her father's legacy, but in these arms that had become her sanctuary. The years would bring challenges, of course. The Montana territory was still wild, still demanding. But together, they would face whatever came their way, just as they had from the beginning. And when their son was born that November, a strong, healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit, they named him Jonathan, after Katherine's father. As Henry placed their infant son in Katherine's arms, his face alight with love for both of them, she knew that their story was just beginning. From the ashes of tragedy, they had built something beautiful, a family, a home, a future filled with promise. What had begun as a desperate flight from danger had become a journey towards something neither of them had expected to find again: happiness. Outside their window, the Montana mountains stood solid and unchanging against the sky, witnesses to their unlikely love story, a story of courage and second chances in the wild heart of the American frontier.